Good evening, all. Welcome to the second session of first day FTP organized by School of Mass Communication, TTP University. We had our first session where Professor Vishwajit Das delivered his talk on pedagogy and learning in cross-cultural communication. And in this second session of first day, we have our guest, Dr. G. Ravindran, Professor and Head Department of Media and Communication Center in University Tamil Nadu. Now, I would like to request our post coordinator, Dr. Viswan Das, to introduce our speaker and the theme. Hand it over to Vidhu sir. You're muted, sir.
Yeah. Am I audible now? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Anurag. It's always a great pleasure to welcome Professor Gopalan Ravindran, a senior academician from India. Professor Ravindran is the senior professor and head of the Department of Media and Communication at Central University of Tamil Nadu. He has served as a professor and head at the Department of Journalism and Communication in University of Madras for more than a decade. In his early career, he has worked with MS University Tirunelveli. Professor Ravindran was a visiting research fellow in Osaka, Japan recently. In 90s, he was also a visiting fellow at Department of International Communication, Nagoya University, Japan. He has also taught in the School of Communication, universities in Malaysia in his early career. Professor Ravindran has served in many academic administrative positions in different universities and University Grants Commission. He has also got many awards for his contribution to teaching and research. His research interest includes critical theories and philosophies, political economy of journalism and communication, spatiality, temporality, and materiality of communication, critical pedagogies in journalism and communication, film cultures, digital cultures, and diasporic cultures. His research work is supported by many agencies such as UGC, New Zealand India Research Institute, Indian Council for Social Science Research, UNESCO, and few others. Professor Ravindran has contributed immensely to media academics by publishing, delivering special lectures, and conducting workshops, organizing master classes, and national and international conferences. He has delivered keynote addresses in many Asian countries, naming a few: India, Sri Lanka, Japan, China, Korea, and so on. We welcome you, sir. In a personal note, I got an opportunity to hear Professor Ravindran in a national conference at Tirunelveli in 2011. That was a community radio conference, and my PhD was on community radio, so I had gone there. That was my first encounter with Professor Ravindran. Since then, we are in contact, and we always seek opportunities to invite Professor Ravindran to our various activities. Thank you, sir, for giving your precious time. Today, Professor Ravindran will talk on alternative qualitative research methodologies in communication and journalism studies. In fact, he's a professor who loves to think and act out of the box assignments. Let's listen, Professor Ravindran. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bidhu. Can I share my screen from here? If you can permit. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Maybe yeah, I will take some more time. Let me first congratulate Bidhu and his colleagues for organizing this event. I will take off from the last few points of Professor Biswajit Das about the state of the field. Like many, Professor Biswajit Das and myself refuse to, for strong reasons, consider communication as a discipline, not without reason. To talk in terms of a discipline, we require a large body of knowledge, not only theories. He only mentioned theories in terms of social sciences and in terms of communication. So that is a very useful point to get into the topic I am going to speak on today. It's about what I don't like. what I don't like in the sense, I don't like putting things into categories. I don't like putting things or people into categories. If so, as an academic, I have no justification to put research into categories such as quantitative, qualitative, Marxist, etc., etc. More so, for the reason that just as we have inherited our current modes of knowledge acquisition from the West, just as we have inherited whatever Indian universities are constituted by, okay? Universities across the world are universities because of the constituting elements, constituents, and these are the disciplines. You remove the disciplines, a university cannot exist in India or abroad. Universities are about size, and the size parameter normally is about the number of departments, number of disciplines. So if you look at the website of Indian universities, you find some universities have more than 100 departments. For instance, BHU. The universities I worked, for instance, University of Madras has something like 80 plus departments. Now, why we have these compartments? Universities call them as departments, but as a critically minded academic, I look at them as compartments. Just as our house is divided into compartments. So you have a veranda, you have a drawing room, you have a bedroom, you have a kitchen, okay? So likewise, universities are compartmentalized. Knowledge seeking, as a result, becomes a very fractured exercise. And all of us have become very insular. So there are as many tribes as there are disciplines. There are as many tribes of academics as there are departments in a university. Is it good or bad? Secondly, whatever we claim to do as research, why we are doing it? And what is research anyway? How we inherited this research as a term, as a site of academic endeavors, as a site of academic careers, etc., etc. Did ancient or medieval universities in the East and West have any sort of engagement with research or theorize? They did theorize heavily. And they were not calling it by the term research. They did advance knowledge, but they did not claim that they were doing it through research. But for the last 500 years, roughly, we are obsessed with this term research. History tells us it's a Middle French term. It's a term of Middle French origin that has been with us since 1557. So these are very important questions when we to engage with when we talk about something like today's topic, alternative qualitative research methodologies in journalism and communication. One of the terms of reference which made Michel Foucault very substantive as a philosopher is problematization. Why I should lecture on a topic I don't like? I am lecturing on a topic I don't like precisely because I am seeking to problematize, trying to find out what has gone wrong in terms of a certain history of research for the lack of any useful alternative term. I am using research in the title, okay? For the lack of any useful term, I am prefacing alternative before qualitative. So my disagreement with conventional qualitative methodologies has to be deployed on a canvas of problematization. I cannot simply say I don't like compartmentalization and get away with it. As a responsible academic, I must tell my students how we can unpack this. We cannot unpack this by getting away from the problem. We can unpack this by getting into the problem. And one way of getting into the problem is, it is a Foucauldian logic of problematization. Some way. So I am trying to use this tool of prefix alternative to problematize, to gain some understanding about what is wrong with existing or conventional qualitative research methodologies. And Bidhu has added the last two terms, journalism and communication. So in my original title, it was not that. Bidhu added it that way. So I like this idea of engaging with alternative qualitative research methodologies, even though all these terms are problematic. All these terms can be demolished. I'm using a very polite term. All these terms can be demolished with ease. But still, I want to provoke your thoughts. I'm always interested in trying to see youngsters taking to knowledge seeking and youngsters doing works of significance, youngsters trying to break new grounds in the field. Now, I made a statement here. I could have used youngsters doing relevant research. I didn't use relevant research. Okay. Now, many a time we hear from policymakers and others in higher education that we must all be doing socially relevant research. These are, in my opinion, aimless targets. Who defines your society? Who defines what is social in the Indian context? What is social in the Indian context is beyond anyone's grasp. So with these thoughts, let me introduce you to what I consider as meaningful explorations of knowledge seeking, meaningful alternative explorations of knowledge seeking. I'm not trying to say that whatever is being done in the name of qualitative research or research in general is not up to the mark. I am just trying to drive home the point that, as Professor Biswajit Das said, working in a domain like journalism or in a domain like communication in India should make us understand, first of all, whether we are students, teachers, researchers, or somebody, that these are domains imported from the West at a particular point of time. Any import, whether it is a commodity product or food product or a knowledge product or a IPR, comes with its own baggage, which will have its effect for decades, centuries, even a millennia. We don't know. Now, during the food crisis of 60s, USA had a deal with India. It went by the name PL 480. Okay. Now, in Tamil Nadu, wherever you go in the rural areas, you find the proliferation of one particular kind of wheat plant. It cannot be eradicated. It's everywhere. So one information tells me that PL 480 wheat also add seeds of this wheat plant. Okay. So likewise, when journalism was imported into this country, when communication entered this country as a discipline, it came with a certain baggage, which we cannot relate to unless we read the history of how communication, as Professor Biswajit Das said, emerged as a university level field in the USA, and what is the role of Second World War in the emergence of our discipline. Today we are talking about all this thanks to German propaganda during the Second World War and the American counter to it, how social scientists came together to do research in matters concerning communication. So we continue to work with survey research. thanks to the pioneering work of one of these scholars, Paul Lazarsfeld. So when we ask our PhD students or MPhil students to work on survey research or any method, we should also tell the student the politics of the emergence of that method. Every method emerged at a particular period of history because of a certain politics. So if you stretch the history of survey research method pioneered by Paul Lazarsfeld, who was a sociologist, you end up at the doorsteps of Adolf Hitler. That's how I seek knowledge critically. I don't stop with Paul Lazarsfeld. I go beyond that. So you can't say survey research method was pioneered by Paul Lazarsfeld. I would add a few more sentences. Survey research method was pioneered by Paul Lazarsfeld thanks to the grants his team received from the State Department to answer the questions made possible by Adolf Hitler's communication propaganda team. Understand? Then our PhD and MPhil students would get the hidden view of this research method. This is the same with most of the other methods. So the numbers game that goes in the name of empirical research, quantitative research, was made possible during this period. The effects tradition in communication research, which continues to govern much of what goes on in the name of research across the world, with the exception of a few regions, such as Japan, Korea, China. China is going the US way completely. Europe, in other places, communication research means quantitative, empirically governed research. Unless you have some understanding of how research is done in Europe, you can't get into critical theories and philosophy-based research. Okay, so hope you can see Bidu.
Sir, yeah.
Yeah. Now, whether we call it research or by any other term, we must have a vision. Living in 2021, students of a certain age, faculty members of a certain age, researchers of a certain age, all of us should be inspired by those who engage with the same issues, same questions, same answers in the past in different countries. You can't do well as an academic or teacher or researcher unless you are in the company of very good teachers who should inspire you in every moment of your living. Whether you are sleeping or not sleeping, they should occupy your mind. Their words should be resonating in your mind. So one such person, in my case, there are many, but when it comes to knowledge seeking, and doing something that is grounded in my local context, that is grounded in my language, that is grounded in my people, that is grounded in my community, that is grounded in my society. I am inspired by the vision of one of the pioneers of Frankfurt School of Thought, Max Horkheimer. So when he took over as the director of the Frankfurt Institute of Social Sciences, he came out with his notion of critical theory. And this term theory here is very deceptive in the sense it was not narrowly positioned. It was meant to advance, it was meant to convey a different kind of knowledge seeking. Carefully, I'm not using the word research. I am also not emphasizing theory. I am more inspired by the term critical. And critical, in the case of Horkheimer, is not to be associated with criticism or critical note or something different. What is my contribution as a teacher or researcher towards change? Change not of contemporary times, but change of the future. So I am more governed by this logic of critical theory, vision of critical theory, to create a rationally organized future society that regulates its own existence and satisfies common needs. So likewise, you have research that exists as research and research that contributes to change of your people wherever you live. All of us have certain roots in our villages of our parents, grandparents. What have we done to this context, local context, very local context? Have we ever cared to go there and apply the methods we learned, the knowledge we acquired, to study and contribute to change, argued by Horkheimer? So if you look at the so-called research on a broad canvas, then you tend to get very dismissive about these categories, these terms, qualitative and quantitative. Which are very mainstreaming labels. Anything which seeks to mainstream something which cannot be mainstream is doing a negative contribution, in my opinion. We have no right to mainstream. And whatever we are talking about as alternatives will become mainstream. So there is this circulation of mainstream and alternative logic. We must acquire certain resistance, and that resistance can come only with certain sensitivity on the part of academics to understand that there is an inherent politics in all this. By politics, and I mean the sides of power struggles in the Foucauldian sense, not in the sense of party politics. Okay. In any case, whether you are fond of quantitative or qualitative or any kind of research, we need to get the basics right, which doesn't happen across the world, unfortunately. My experience with doctoral level students in many countries tell me that they are at a disadvantage in understanding the basics. So one important basic is getting these terms, basic terms, correctly. A very basic qualification of a researcher is to get the basics rightly. Something like, what is a method? Why a method cannot be a methodology? Method cannot be a methodology, and methodology cannot be a method, in my opinion. Methods always refer to modes of or tools which help us to information. In the case of qualitative research. In the case of quantitative, we call the same information as data. And methodologies are the conceptual frameworks which have a long history and tell us how these methods should be approached. We always confuse, not confuse, we take for granted that method is methodology. That's why 99% of PhD theses in India have this methodology chapter talking about method. Please tell me if you have come across any PhD thesis with a chapter on methodology talking about methodology. I have not come across any PhD thesis which talks about methodology. They only talk about, always talk about method of data collection. Now, we must realize that knowledge seeking, knowledge acquisition operates at multiple levels. It operates in a universe where whatever we term as quantitative and qualitative are only tiny specks of dust, in my opinion. They are very little domains. So what are the other domains? You have so many other domains, little universes, which we don't relate to. You have phenomenological research, you have philosophical research, you have historical research, you have within Marxist tradition, you have more than a dozen research domains. So these little universes within the larger expanding universe is something we should all be relating to in a rational way. We can't consider these two trees in the forest, quantitative, qualitative, as a forest. What are these two little trees, in my opinion? Quantitative, qualitative. These two trees cannot be equated with a very large forest otherwise. And thanks to this obsession with this binary, we always, human beings love to work with binaries. Male, female, good, bad, hero, villain, okay. That is one of the reasons we love to work with this binary division of research, quantitative and qualitative. It's more like watching a masala film, understand? It has very predictable journeys, outcomes. It is very formulaic, driven by a certain formula. It's more like Indian train. The arrangement of the coaches is very predictable. Engine, followed by an unreserved coach, followed by A1, A2, B1, B3, S1, etc., etc. Finally, the God. So we should get away from this logic of compartmentalization of research. Pure knowledge seeking cannot afford to work with such categories. However, as I said earlier, we need to engage with Foucault's logic of problematization and try to see what is the other side of the coin. What are the discontinuities we need to leverage as continuities in future? So I am to make a room for easy understanding. I am trying to engage with the conventional mainstream qualitative method and what I consider as alternative qualitative method. In all these cases, we can't take a purely communication within quotes approach, because these working with these methods require a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. I am saddened to see in many communication departments, teachers wrongly guiding research students, even with an age-old quantitative method like content analysis. Okay. It is something like 82 years old, if I am not wrong. And during its existence for the last 80 years, it has gone through dramatic transformations. But our teachers and trying to impose their logic of content analysis on the students. That appears to them as a only quantitative method in many a case. Very unfortunate. It's because of the wrong orientation that they are communication teachers and researchers who need not study anthropology, sociology, political science, psychology, etc. If you want to get into research of any kind in any discipline, you should first forget that you belong to a discipline. You must suspend that logic. Otherwise, you'll be a frog in the well. That's why, like Stuart Hall, who said famously in one of the tribute conferences in his home country, Jamaica, he said that many a time I am pictured as an anti-disciplinary person. I would like to correct it. I don't want to talk about it. I am a transdisciplinary person. There is a lot of difference between saying that this person is anti-disciplinary than saying that he is a transdisciplinary person. Once Mahatma Gandhi said famously, I would like winds from all directions to blow over my house. That is my logic of transdisciplinary accommodation. A transdisciplinary person should allow winds from all directions, all disciplines, to blow over his house. Now, if it is ethnography, you can't do ethnography without a grounding in anthropology or grounding in sociology. And many in communication are into ethnography. But the but is a big one, because you may not have studied anthropology, but you can do a really great job than anthropologists if you are going to use this method in communication creatively. And one such opportunity comes in the way of what is known as autoethnography, which I consider as alternative method. Alternative, not because it exists, but because during the last 30 years, autoethnography as an alternative method has also become methodology. Rarely this happens. Method becoming methodology, it happens rarely. Understand? Content analysis never became a methodology, in my opinion. I have been with content analysis since late 70s. But autoethnography during the last 30 years has emerged as a methodology. How? When a method becomes methodology, when a brick becomes a house, same logic. When a group of bricks become a house, a group of bricks become a house because of a certain plan, because of a certain vision on the part of the builder and the house owner, prospective house owner. A method is more like the brick or group of bricks. So autoethnography is one such method and methodology. Youngsters can test waters. Then all of us are familiar with in-depth interviews in qualitative research. Alternatively, we can think about instead of doing in-depth interview, we can do diaries. We can ask the respondents to keep diaries and then interpret the content. Then you have focus group discussion, a widely popular method across the world. It has become so mechanical as a method. Methods are mechanical in a sense. Methods today exist more like the toothpaste we buy from shop shelves. That should not be our understanding, or that should not be the nature of engagement with methods. That happens because we have divorced method from their methodologies, the context, the philosophical and conceptual frameworks, which is not the same as your theoretical framework. Now, when I say autoethnography is both a method and methodology, when I see autoethnography as a methodology, methodologies, in my opinion, always are about ideologies. Okay. The other name for methodologies, in my opinion, is ideology. So autoethnography as a methodology, as an ideology. What is ideology? It takes pot shots at research which says objective reality can be captured. Objective reality can be measured. Objective reality can be studied with representations, media representations. No. So the methodological position of autoethnography is forget objective reality. I am not here as a researcher, autoethnographer, to chase objective reality by studying representations, etc., etc. I am here to live the experiences. I am not here to externalize something in my reality. I am here to experience the old reality. What happens normally is, in the case of both qualitative and quantitative research methods and methodology, the researchers try to externalize everything. We are not encouraged to internalize something from the reality. Journalism today suffers because of this. Journalism must be about objectivity. But nobody can convincingly define what is objectivity. It's a Western notion that fails to take roots in countries like India. So likewise in research also, we have been told umpteen number of times, we must be objective. We cannot be subjective. So this positivism, any ideology has its appeal, attractions, and dangers. Now, for the first 500 years, the West has been made the subject of positivism. And the West also paid a heavy price during the First and Second World Wars. And one of the inspiration for Frankfurt School scholars to critique Enlightenment was how could societies which reached the height of human reason, enlightenment, could end up killing so many lakhs of people in a gruesome manner. So critical theory was trying to bring back human reason, enlightenment. So any ideology has its danger. And Renaissance as an ideology also had its dangers. Enlightenment as an ideology also had its dangers. So there is a methodology we need to associate with autoethnography, and that methodology is ideologically grounded. Here the ideology says that we cannot chase objective reality. We must live the experiences, period. And once we live the experiences, we can get into a process and come out with a product. And that product must be a different product. And that is an autoethnographic account of our experiences with something. So there is a method, there is a process, there is an ideology, there is a product. You don't write an autoethnographic account in the way we write the regular thesis. We write an autoethnographic account, a thesis rooted in autoethnography, more like a novelist or a short story writer, in a very creative way. Then you have photo voice as one important alternative method. We are used to studying photo albums, visual analysis. There is this branch of anthropology, visual anthropology. But photo voice is a different method. So it is like doing a focus group discussion on the basis of the photographs made possible by the participants, community members. During earlier times, anthropologists used to go to their field, take photographs, come back, analyze them. Now with the photo voice method, we encourage the community participants to do their own photography. We encourage them to select the photographs that best describe their everyday life, their problems, their issues. And then on the basis of the photographs chosen, we encourage them to get into discussion mode. So these photos are not the same as the photos taken by outsiders or professional photographers or even the researchers. All of us are familiar with semiotics. So we get into semiotic analysis of films, film narratives, television narratives, newspaper stories, etc., etc. But we are not into what is known as social semiotic analysis, which has been emerging in a very strong manner for the past 15 years, since 2005. Thanks to these two scholars, they are also collaborators, Gunther Grace and Van Leeuwen. And what is social semiotic analysis? And what is the difference between the conventional semiotic method or analysis and social semiotics? Semiotics or semiology they consider sign as the basic building block. And sign is constituted by two parts, the material part and the meaning part. And sign requires a grammar for meaning making. Sign also requires a language to exist as a sign. But in the case of social semiotic, the sign is replaced by what are known as semiotic resources. A semiotic resource is more than a sign. A semiotic resource is about what the members of the collective community or society practice. It is not a detached material thing. A social semiotic resource is part of everyday life practices, everyday community practices. So here, social semioticians take seriously what they call as a semiotic resource. They are not content with working with a sign. Sign is seen as having a very limited potential. So walking, for instance, is considered as a semiotic resource. Have you ever done a study on how people walk in our markets? Why people walk differently with different postures in airports? How people walk in the corridors of the university? With what postures they walk? Walking here is a social practice.
Extremely sorry, sir. Sorry for interruption. Actually, we have another session at 6:20. We can wind up the session exactly so that we can take few questions also in the last session. Yes, sir. Please.
It's not 6:30. We have the next session at 6:30. So, so even we can continue.
How long I can take, Bidu?
So next 5-7 minutes. So we can at least take few questions and wind up by 6:30 max.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I will wind up in 2 to 3 minutes. Then we can have the questions. Okay.
Sure.
So I will stop with this social semiotics.
Yes.
So a sign is looked at differently here as a semiotic resource. So a semiotic resource is the site of analysis of your social semioticians. So likewise, you have so many methods and methodology in terms of what they call as alternatives. Maybe later when we get time, we can engage with some of them. Critical discourse analysis is very popular. Discourse analysis is very popular. But there is something called Foucauldian critical discourse analysis. Understand? There is something called Deleuzian critical discourse analysis. So from discourse analysis, we have moved to critical discourse analysis. From critical discourse analysis, we have to move to other alternatives. So we should not become stagnant with any one method or methodology. I stop here. Maybe when we take up questions, we can do little more.
Thank you so much, sir. You can say it is such an eye-opening session that in the field of community research, few things, because we generally talk a lot about research, but these things definitely we ignore the basics of research. I request all the participants to ask if you have any questions to ask. You can type out or you can raise your hand so that we can take your questions because we have 5 minutes left.
Sir, namaskar. Okay,
Namaskar.
Mohan from Chandigarh University this side.
Okay.
Sir, actually, I wanted to know, can we go for a combined study of mass communication and fine arts together?
Okay. Firstly, let us not go by these disciplinary labels, mass communication or finance. Okay, you take seriously the topic.
Okay.
Okay, so let us not be governed by this mass communication and finance. Okay, maybe you can engage with the specific topic. Forget whether it belongs to mass communication or finance.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Before anybody asks the question, let me take this. Somebody has raised the hand. Okay, please go ahead. Somebody has raised
Yes,
the hand.
Prantha sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
You can-
please, Prantha.
Yeah, thank you, Anurag sir. Thank you. Hello, sir. It is very nice to listen to you, and I was looking forward to your session. And it is very much
Thank you.
essential
Thank you.
that we incorporate so much of different methods and methodologies when you are saying. And when we talked about autoethnography, my only worry or concern, you can say, the way we have been socialized in this media sociology or any of the discipline about subjectivity and objectivity, whether this autoethnography will lead us to a kind of subjective biasness of the researcher. And if yes, then how can we overcome that in autoethnography?
What is bias? Bias is the invention of human mind, isn't it? We are all human beings, and we cannot do without the so-called bias. This is the ideological position of autoethnography. Bias must be encouraged. So, unlike
Oh,
other
wow.
research methodologies, autoethnographers argue. For instance, Ellis and Boschner argue that subjectivity must be the king, subjectivity must be the queen, bias must be leveraged better. Bias is the ingredient of autoethnography. So, in other words, autoethnography is nothing but a biographical, self-biographical account. Understand? So, what did Gandhi do with his self-biographical account? My experiments with truth.
The truth.
So, you can't say it's a biased account. It's a brilliant account of truth. It is not biased.
Yeah.
Understand? So, we must get away from this imported logic of research, that research must avoid bias. We are not machines. If I am doing a research on cancer, what causes cancer? So I can eliminate bias. Smoking causes cancer. There is a cause and effect. Smoking continuously, cigarettes or any tobacco, causes cancer. I'm not a scientist here. I'm not a cancer specialist here. Understand? So we must get away from this logic of natural sciences. Okay, natural sciences are fit to have this logic of positivism. So natural sciences like physics, chemistry, they are fit to have this empirical way of understanding, reducing errors, reducing bias. When I am working with people, When I'm working with myself as a research subject, then I cannot work like a natural scientist. Okay.
True.
I am in fact not in agreement with calling these disciplines as social sciences. Okay, so there is a problem with the suffix
Exactly.
sciences. So when did history become, or psychology or communication become sciences? Some Indian universities also have gone overboard and have media sciences. When did media become
Yeah.
science? It's stupidity. We are also cheating the students. We have cheated the generations of students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Vidhu,
Uh,
can I raise a question?
Yeah, please.
Please. Please.
Thank you, Professor Ravindran Gopalan. It was an eye opener, and for long we've been thinking about these alternative methods. But I have one question. Taking what Dr. Panta Pratim taking his question further. In the times that we follow the research rigors, the methodologies, and the all the so-called rules and things. The problem is that what kind of acceptance will it have, another alternative methodologies will have in today's media education sociology, if I can take your thing further, Prantaji. Would these alternative methods have acceptance in the wider academic circle, like the way they are ingrained in the mainstream methods?
Very unlikely, Mr. Patra, in the near future.
Yes.
Because we have been brainwashed.
Yes.
For a few hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have been brainwashed to think that this is research, this is rigor, this is a systematic way of acquiring knowledge. Or this is research is the only way of acquiring knowledge. In my opinion,
the way you talked about positivism, that's fantastic. If I do anything, some ethnological practices, it would be considered as kind of a personal indulgence, not research. That's the problem. That's the problem.
No, it takes a long time, but I am very optimistic. If you have some 10 students, try to tell them that this is the way to go forward. Okay, if 10 teachers are going to do like that, we will have 100 students in the next 5 years. Okay, so you try to teach them this is a different way to write a thesis. For instance, one example I am telling you. Now, if I get 10 theses, 9 theses follow the conventional structure.
Yes.
Introduction, review of literature, methodology, analysis. But I tell my students, avoid this. Think creatively. A title for your first chapter. The purpose is introducing the thesis. But why use this slug? Why use this label introduction? Think about a creative narrative way of communicating to the audience.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was asked to rewrite completely my thesis because they said, no, it is not creative writing. This is research writing. And you have to follow the rigors of research writing.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, sir, for this eye-opener.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Bidhu, for this opportunity.
We have few more questions in the chat box, but due to constraint of time, we are unable to take the questions.
Okay.
So now I would like to, yes, Vidusha, you're saying something, please.
I think there are 2 questions. If sir can respond to these 2 questions very quickly.
Yes,
and
one question.
Kumar's,
Yes, I'm reading out
please.
the question, sir.
Okay, please.
So it's a question from Archana ma'am, Archana Kumari. So you had said autoethnography has become a method from a methodology.
Yes.
Can you elaborate how?
Now I explained it. When a method becomes methodology, yeah, one moment. Can you hear me?
Yes,
when a method becomes methodology, it is no longer a mere tool of collecting information.
Yes.
So it has an ideology which tells us how to go about it. Understand? So it is not just a recording whatever experiences I have. It has a purpose. It questions conventional research logic. Now your friend asked, can we do this? Can we, don't you think that we would lose the research rigor, etc., etc.? The ideology, the methodology of autoethnography is simple. We must be ideologically governed to critique conventional ways of knowledge seeking. That puts a premium on all these things. Research must be systematic, research must be methodological, research must be scientific. I am not here in communication trying to engage with my tribal research subject in a scientific manner. I am not a cancer specialist trying to find out what causes cancer. Understand? Here, subjectivity must be given room. Okay, that is ideology. Objective reality cannot be found out by anyone.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Perhaps another question, partially, sir had responded to the question. So how do we encourage new researchers to adapt these innovative methodologies? I think Meet sir had asked the questions.
And
sir had
that
answered the
question
questions,
is
I think.
asked by Dr. Hari Kumar. That's a good question, in fact. Anyway, so the time doesn't permit. Can I share one of my experiences? Because I did ethnography as part of my PhD work, and my student did autoethnography as part of PhD work. So I did my PhD from TISS. My guide was Professor Anjali and Joy Shankar.
Okay.
And my master students did PhD from MICA with Manisha Pathak Selot, and she did an autoethnography.
Okay.
So my point is that if we are oriented, then we can orient more students in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We must have the clarity. Students should not be blamed.
Yes,
Students,
sir, yes.
yeah, students will follow a good teacher, researcher always.
Oh, thank you so much. We will go to the next
you so
agenda. Vote of thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to request our assistant professor Ruby Nanda, Mrs. Ruby Nanda, to give vote of thanks. Ma'am, handing over to you. Please unmute yourself. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Job of a great teacher, as sir said, is to show direction. And who better than Ravindran sir? It is always a pleasure to hear him. And his ideas may be extremely complex, but the way he puts them is so simple that it is like a great learning experience, not only his knowledge, but also as a teacher. Thank you so much, sir, for giving
My
your
pleasure.
to us. Sir has always been there for our school, and it is always a great pleasure to have him here. We are honored, and thank you so much, sir. We are so much more enriched, and we hope that in future also we will be enriched by your knowledge. I also want to thank our founder, sir, for Dr. Achyut Samant, sir, for visualizing this and to always encourage of always encouraging us to touching those can we say excellence. So the inspiration is always there for us. I would like to thank our CEO, sir, Professor Himanshu Khatwa, sir, for being there for us and for allowing us to grow as teachers and also as students also. It's such a pleasure. And thank you, Dr. Bidubhushan Das and Dr. Anurag Satpathy, Sahu, sir, for being here and moderating the issue. So we can thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.